So I didn't introduce myself. My name's David Johnson. I'm the team leader at FHWA. My team is the managing disruptions to operations. We cover things like road weather management, work zone management, traffic incident management, as well as operational data. We also are getting more involved in things like this, like planned special events and events management. Luckily, I have somebody here to help me set the stage. But first, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So just real quick, this is kind of a very quick overview of what we're looking at here. We do have on April 8th a large total solar eclipse. You can see the map there, and the map will be shown several times throughout the webinar. There are 13 states that are directly under the path of totality. You can see the path there. And this eclipse differs from the 2017 eclipse in that there are several larger metropolitan areas that are going to be involved. Dallas, Fort Worth, Little Rock, Indianapolis, Cleveland, and Buffalo, just to name a few. There's many more, like I said, metro areas in close proximity to the path, as we saw in 2017. There was an estimated 32 million people. There are an estimated 32 million people living within the path of totality. That's in comparison to only 12 million in the 2017 solar eclipse. So quite a bit of more people are living within the path. We don't have exact numbers, but we do estimate, and this is based on what we saw in the 17 total eclipse. We anticipate about 5 million people traveling to the path of totality. Maybe not directly into the path that you see in that as that black line that's crossing the United States, but somewhere around there. A lot of this travel is going to take place right of the day of the event. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And why this matters is, and in relation to what we're talking about, is how does this matter in relation to transportation operations? We know that we're going to have a large amount of people, like I mentioned, nearly 5 million people traveling to see the event in the path of totality. Most of these people are going to travel to the path by car. Not to say everybody will, but the vast majority will. As we saw in the 17 eclipse, and I was working in Colorado DOT at the time, arrival does take place over multiple days. Obviously, you see an increase in people traveling the day of, sometimes even up to the hour of the eclipse taking place. And for folks that are traveling ahead of time, if they're days ahead, they've typically planned ahead. But there are folks that don't necessarily plan ahead, and they try and find parking places. They try and find good viewing areas. And sometimes they don't necessarily think through their actions. So obviously this is relevant for traffic incident management, as well as many other aspects of transportation operations. And then also what we see is almost immediately after the event concludes, everybody wants to get out of town. So you would see massive influx of congestion directly after the event because everybody wants to leave. What we experienced in 2017 was basically all interstate routes that were impacted became congested. Interstate routes along the path in 2017 experienced delays of up to 13 hours after totality. And as you know, that creates all kinds of issues, whether it be for emergency management and response, whether it is for folks that don't plan ahead, maybe they didn't bring enough fluids, water, medications, toilet accessibility, that sort of stuff. So people need to expect long delays during the aftermath of the solar eclipse. Rural non-freeway routes experience congestion up to 15.5 hours and queues of up to 70 miles. And then, like I said, based on the highway capacity manual level of service, many urban and rural locations experience F level conditions. And the congestion spread well outside the path of totality. The path of totality in the 2017 eclipse was a good couple hundred miles north of where I was in Colorado. And we still saw massive congestion and unpredictable driving behaviors. Next slide, please. So some of the lessons learned and the potential effects from the 17 eclipse. is, for public messaging, we saw, widespread reminders about roadway safety. It may have helped spread the arrivals in 17. So now's a great time to start communicating to your travelers in your state that, expect major delays. Plan ahead. We like to let people know that, immediately after the event, try and stay put for some time. Be prepared, pack enough essentials with you. For the viewing location, people are going to park, particularly those that don't plan ahead. They're going to park wherever they deem either is legal or wherever they can get a really good viewing spot, and that can be just about anywhere. So plan ahead. If you have any sort of areas that can be repurposed for vehicle parking, such as rest areas, and other sort of transportation or trucking facilities, start thinking about those as well. Weather obviously plays a big key component of a planned special event like this. For something like the solar eclipse, cloud coverage does play into how people travel and where they go. Obviously, we won't know what the forecast looks like until, well, probably within 24 hours or so of the event. But just keep that in mind, that people do change their patterns, particularly if they're trying to view something in the sky. If there are clouds, that's going to change where they try and go. For work zones, the plan is really that we want to minimize work zone activities and lane closures when at all possible. People are going to use, again, any and all areas. Obviously, if you have any portable message signs, we want to communicate that an active work zone or even an inactive zone is not parking, and it's not a place to view. It's not safe. But try and minimize with your contractors your work zone activities. As far as incident management goes, plan for resource deployment such as towers, wreckers. Also, obviously, coordination with your local law enforcement and EMS is critical. If you know where your bottleneck locations are, plan for some resources there. And as far as tourism, you can expect a lot of people to come in and out. Traffic patterns don't typically stay the same when viewing something like this. So just be aware that travel behaviors and volumes and capacity will certainly change ahead of an event like this. And then we do have an international aspect to this, since this does come from Mexico and goes north up to Canada. So if you're in those areas, there's different considerations to think about, and we'll have a session speaking directly to that here later in the webinar. Next slide, please. And I think with that, I'm gonna hand it over to our first speaker. Dr. Kelly Korrick let me pull up your bio real quick. Dr. Kelly Korrick is a heliophysicist, and she knows how to handle heat. She built and operated instruments to study the sun and understand its hot, explosive outer atmosphere, or corona. Her career has taken her from the desert of New Mexico to Japan to the inner part of the solar system. She was the head of science operations and project manager for SWEEP, the suite aboard Parker Solar Probe. Currently, she's the NASA program manager for the 2024 solar eclipse. Kelly, I'll turn the floor over to you, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. And this is really on behalf of the huge NASA Eclipse collective that is so excited about the upcoming events on the 8th. Next slide, please. So what is a total eclipse? You'll see on the left there, that darker image is showing the moon going in front of the sun. And we happen to live in this very special place in the entire universe where we have a moon that's just far enough away and just big enough to completely eclipse the sun. On the right, there's a diagram showing you the sun and then the moon that's in the way, or in between the moon and the sun and the Earth, to get that blockage. And so this is again a special alignment. It doesn't happen every month because the moon is actually tilted in rotation to the Earth's axis. So we don't hit it every time, every month. So this is more of every 18 months somewhere on Earth, we get one of these total solar eclipses. Next slide, please. So we saw this map a little bit earlier, and this is the path of totality across the United States. So again, coming up through the Gulf of Mexico, up through Mexico, through 13 states, and out through Canada. If you happen to see, there's hash marks all over the United States. So the contiguous United States and parts of Hawaii and Alaska will also see a partial eclipse. So everyone in the US is able to experience a part of this. And we'll talk a little bit about the safety differences between a partial eclipse and a total eclipse. But this map is also very special that NASA made. We used all the information we know about the moon and the actual valleys that it has to make that kind of potato shape or weird shape that you see in these little circles showing the shadow going across the US. So every crater and valley in the moon will either let some sunlight in or not let some sunlight in. So this is a very accurate map of where we will get total darkness. And the closer you are to the center line of this line, the longer the eclipse will be. So this path is both wider than in 2017 and the duration is longer. So you can get up to 4.5 minutes of totality in this, where the moon is completely covering the face of the sun and you're able to see the sun's corona. Next slide, please. So here's the timing of the eclipse in various locations. And some things to consider is this could be during school commuting time. Some school districts have already announced that they'll be closed at this time. It also could coincide with a lunch or dinner time, rush hours. And so, considering things like work from home orders might be in order. So this is, again, a list, and you could find more times online. Next slide, please. So NASA has a few priorities for this upcoming total solar eclipse. And number one is safety. So we want to make sure that we have safe viewing glasses, because you will have an issue if you were to stare at the sun called solar retinopathy, which actually burns the eclipse or the sun into your retina, which is not something we want folks to do. We also want to broaden participation. This is going to reach around 300 million Americans will have some part of an eclipse this time. So we want to make sure that we have broad participation. We're going to have science experiments, and I'll show you a couple of those. Public engagement in at least 13 spots across the US for NASA. Science activation, where learners actually do science, and citizen science, where scientists can participate in NASA science. Next slide, please. So this is a time-lapse photo of when you're going to need a safe filter or an indirect viewing method. And that's everything to the left or to the right is when you're going to need an indirect viewing method, meaning not looking directly at the sun, unless you have a pair of solar viewing glasses or a strainer or an indirect method. So the solar viewing glasses, like something like these, they're very dark. They're not sunglasses. You would need something much darker than that. Next slide, please. So this wonderful young viewer from Cleveland has her glasses on correctly when looking up at the sun. And these are ISO certified glasses. NASA does not certify glasses. So if folks say that they're NASA certified, they are not, they are actually not NASA certified. We do not certify glasses. There is an ISO standard for the darkness, the thickness of this film to make sure that you have the right thickness there. There's also, again, the indirect viewing methods, such as making a pinhole viewer, like you see there, and instructions are online on how to do that. Next slide, please. Other safe viewing methods, there's a 3D printout that you can that folks can use to actually print out a 3D printable map and a pinhole to, again, put it towards your side and enable you to look at this event. Next slide, please. And by indirect viewing method, what I do mean is your back is to the sun at an indirect viewing method. And you could use something as simple as your hands, making those little pinholes so that you project it on the floor and you actually see the crescent the crescent suns at that point in time. You can also use a kitchen strainer to do this. So it doesn't have to be a high cost or have great tools. It's also a great time to look around. Trees will do this naturally. You can even use your hair or some other things in order to make this. So it's a great for entertaining kids is how to make these shadows appear on the ground. Next slide, please. So we have on NASA's website Spanish and multilingual resources as well. There is Spanish web content. There will be media coverage. And we have Spanish media language media outlets as well. There will be a broadcast with the Exploratorium as well. And we have materials translated into French and the next most 5 common languages along the path for safety. So these can be downloaded in case there are communities in your area that need them. Next slide, please. So some of the fun science that we're going to do is launching rockets into the eclipse in order to tell how the communication changes during these eclipses. So when the eclipse goes to this day and night, the ionosphere, or the region of the atmosphere where all of our communications go through, collapses. So we're sending sounding rockets to that area before, during, and after the eclipse to really understand the density temperature differences that we see there, to help us further our models to understand things such as space weather that have similar effects. So this is one of the ways that we're using this as a little laboratory that nature's giving us. Next slide, please. We will also have an airplane, the WB-57 research plane, going and chasing the eclipse. So by chasing in the plane, they get an extra 2 minutes of observing time. So we'll be looking at the outflows of this hot solar corona that is flowing away from the sun at all points and at all times through 2 different instruments. And those instruments can tell us about that wind that interacts with our atmosphere, but it also can tell us about the origin of the star in terms of the dusty ring that the whole solar system was made from. So this is a really interesting way to use this. And this is also another point in terms of the airplane traffic. During 2017, we saw a lot of folks try to get up in the air to see this. So this is just another little part of safety that we need to consider. Next slide, please. So NASA is concentrating our efforts in around 13 different locations across the path in order to where we'll have events, and there'll be things that are free for the public with speakers and exhibits and eclipse classes everywhere from Niagara Falls to Holton, Maine, to a couple of places in Texas and in Indianapolis and Cleveland. Again, we looked for a diverse set of places where we could go. There are so many urban centers. We also wanted some more natural or outdoors type centers. So there's lots of variety here to choose from. Next slide, please. And there are many folks can actually do science during these eclipses. So 1 or 2 that I'll point out here that are really interesting. There will be ballooning projects going on across in every state that has the eclipse. You still will be able to see darkness, even if there's clouds. So folks will notice something if they're in the path, even if it is cloudy. The eclipse soundscape actually listens to nature as the eclipse happens. And again, even if it's cloudy, it will become darkness during the day. The globe program is also a way to observe the Earth around you. And that way you can actually put that information into scientific research that NASA does on clouds, on the eclipse, on various other things that happen during that time. Next slide, please. And we'll also have citizen scientists working on things. So I mentioned before the communications, we have the ham-sci radio folks doing some experiments, as well as looking for things such as Citizen Kate will be taking pictures of the eclipse. So there's many different ways to get involved. And there's actually a heliophysics big year. We're taking this longer than the eclipse. We're going to take it all the way past Parker Solar Probe's closest approach to the sun in December. So we're hoping to get folks excited and interested and participating in this safely, and then keeping up with us and learning more about the sun and the earth around us. Next slide, please. And with that, may you have clear skies on April 8th.
Thank you, Kelly. Lots of fantastic information. I think I turn it over to you, Kevin, to run through the poll questions.
Thanks, David. Welcome, everyone. We are going to take a couple of poll questions now through the platform Menti, excuse me. If you'd like to participate, I have posted a link in the chat pod below. The first question is, for participants in the 2024 solar eclipse event path of totality, which of the following entities has your agency engaged with to begin planning and coordination for the solar eclipse? It's a and you can answer any and all of these. Local National Weather Service weather forecast offices, law enforcement, trucking associations, towing operators, construction contractors, maintenance staff, or local media. We have some answers coming in here. Let me pull it up. This is a great mix. A very wide variety. From 65 respondents, we have, let's see, law enforcement looks like it's the top answer so far, with maintenance staff not far behind. A lot of contacts to local media, a lot of contacts to NWS weather offices. I'll let this go for a few more seconds. Thank you, everyone, for participating. All right, I'm just going to start reading the next question, then we'll advance it so that people can answer. For participants in the 2024 solar eclipse event path of totality, which of the following activities has your agency completed or are planning to complete? A planned special event for the solar eclipse, planning meeting with Area National Weather Service Weather Forecast Office? Are you planning a meeting with law enforcement? Solar eclipse messaging for use on social media? Solar eclipse messaging for use on dynamic message signs? Solar eclipse messaging for a press release? Work zone transportation management plans to consider the solar eclipse? Special provisions to modify construction contracts? Contracts for towing operations for the eclipse event?
Looks like a few people can only select one option on this right now.
Oh. Thank you for participating, everyone. Apologies, you can't select multiple. It's on me. Work zone transportation management plans looking like a big one, but solar eclipse messaging for DMSs is the most popular selection. We have one more polling question, and this one's a bit more open-ended. What other key activities is your agency doing to prepare for the solar eclipse? You take your time and write in an answer in the chat box that you were provided. Regular meetings with all stakeholders. Excellent. Along with interagency coordination. I like not allowing oversized permits. I know that's been brought up a few times. Extra staffing, staging response vehicles, limiting lane closures. "45 responses is fantastic.
Yeah, thanks again for taking the time to respond to these polls. That provides us with a little bit of feedback on either areas we need to focus on more, or maybe some research or development that we need to consider. So it's always appreciative that you take the time. Seeing a lot of good responses on restricting oversized and overweight vehicles, which is great. Lots of coordination. The work zone TMP plan, TMPs, considering eclipse activities for the day of something like an eclipse. Really happy to see that mentioned a few times, and I think the polling question showed a big response for that category as well. So